Hello everyone! It's another tips and tricks guide. This time I couldn't get exactly 60, but I'm pretty dang close, so I'm gonna count it as 60, because it sounds better than saying 57. But yeah, here's another tips and tricks guide. Just like last time, if you haven't seen the original video, I recommend checking that out first. Though to be fair, it doesn't really matter which order you view them in, as it is completely random. Just a bunch of things that I think you should know before getting really into the game. So yeah, let's get right into it. When getting circled by a faster vehicle, usually a light tank or a medium, then just back up next to solid cover to stop them from being able to circle you. You can wedge them between the cover and your tanks so that they have absolutely nothing they can do. When you're in a 1v1 against an opponent on opposite sides of solid cover, usually it's a good idea to back out far enough so that you are unable to proxy spot each other, aka outside of 50 meters, and then get a better angle to keep the opponent guessing. Artillery have almost no gun depression, so the only way to shoot something beneath you is to either wedge your tank upwards so that your front of the tank is facing towards the ground and then simply aim up, or just try to face downhill. But honestly, you shouldn't be this close in artillery anyway. Take advantage of ridges and city maps in order to constantly have a guard for your lower plate. Just because you're on flat streets doesn't mean you have to sit out in the absolute open. If you have an advantage on a single flank, win that flank as soon as humanly possible. The faster you win a flank, that gives your team a massive advantage throughout the entire game, because that is another portion of the map that you have complete control over. If you win one flank and the enemy wins another flank, it is usually a good idea to fall back and defend your flank in a slow tank instead of pushing forwards and trying to outflank the enemy. I kind of confused myself with that recording, but just if you're gonna get outflanked in a slow tank, fall back so you can't get outflanked. Excuse me as I use the exact same clip, but sidescraping is incredibly important. Every single player should know how to do it. Pretty much, you line yourself up with a corner, make sure that you are angled at whatever angle is best for the individual tank in order to bounce as many shots off of the side of your tank, and then once the enemy fires, you can pull back a bit farther and fire such as I am doing here. The trick here is that each tank is different, so the best way to figure out what angle is best for your tank, usually between about 20 and 30 degrees, is by checking on tanks.gg, which I will link in the description somewhere. If you're sidescraping with the tank with a cupola, sidescrape so that the cupola is hidden by the building. So in the VK100-01P's case, the cupola is on the left side of the turret, so sidescrape against the right side of the building so that the cupola cannot be seen as easily. If you manage to get a free shot into the side or rear of your opponent, make sure that you are aiming for either the back of the tank, wherever the engine is, or the back or middle of the side of the turret. That will allow you to either have a higher chance of ammo racking them, or have a higher chance of damaging an engine or fuel tanks and setting them on fire. Against high-tier Russian enemy tanks, make sure that you are shooting above the tracks and below the spaced armor. So there's a small gap in the armor that you should aim for. If you hit either the tracks or the spaced armor, it's a higher chance that your shell will be absorbed. And I apologize for the quality of this clip, this was from a stream. If you are in a tank with a pike frontal nose, such as the IS-3, sometimes it's a good idea to reverse sidescrape, otherwise you will get shot as easily as this guy does, as he continues to drive forwards and give me his weak spots over and over again. When you're in a fast-moving vehicle, pay attention to the direction enemy turrets are facing or turning, and drive in the opposite direction that they are pointing. This one's kind of self-explanatory, but it is a good idea to try to pay as much attention as you possibly can. When trapped by an opponent slower than you, sometimes it's a good idea to stall for team support by just driving around on the opposite side of the rock as them. This Pantera could literally do nothing the entire time, and it was very entertaining. If you happen to be in the position of that very unfortunate Pantera, however, never fear, you can just force the opponent that you are trying to chase down to drive backwards around a rock so that you are easily able to catch them. The easiest way to do this is by forcing them to turn in the direction that you want them to go by turning yourself. So you can manipulate the way they go by the way you turn. Sidescraping against artillery and TDs may sound like a bad idea, but when you are close to them, or when you are in a 50-50 fight while sidescraping against them, you have the advantage in a turreted tank. This is because the hull of the TD is usually a lot thicker than that of a turreted tank, so you are able to very easily shoot them before they are able to shoot you by just shooting into their superstructure, where their guns can't see. You don't just have to angle your armor side to side. Angling your armor on mounds can increase the angle as well. This is particularly useful in the mouse, which a lot of people don't really appreciate as much as they can. Because the armor is so flat on a lot of German super heavy tanks, angling it up and down could easily make it so that the armor is more effective. If you want the lower plate to be stronger, angle it down. If you want the upper plate to be stronger, angle your tank up. Don't feed the trolls in chat. If people are being annoying in chat, there's two different things that you can do. One, right-click their name on your team list and add them to your blacklist. This will make it so that they cannot message you at all anymore. Or you can just as easily hold down Control, mouse over one of the messages that they are non-stop spamming in the chat, and press the little X next to it. That'll block all of their messages for that battle. Listen to your inner Obi-Wan and use the high ground. 9 times out of 10, this is a good idea. Obviously, if you have no gun depression, it's not, but almost all of the time, having the height advantage over your opponent will give you, well, an advantage. Immediately after the last one, get ready to smack your inner Obi-Wan in the face, because instead you're going to get below enemy lines. If you are stuck in the middle of the open against multiple opponents, in order to minimize the amount of things that are firing at you at the same time, please just drive below the thing that's trying to shoot you. They can't shoot you if you have a hill in the way. The basic equipment loadout for all tanks, and I still stick by this after the update with all of the new equipment, is rammer, optics, and vents. If you are unsure of what to use on any of your tanks, that is the safest bet to start from, and then you can modify which of those 3 that you want to modify with each individual tank. When you're facing an opponent firing HE, do everything you possibly can to minimize the amount of damage taken. For example, against a Death Star, if you're caught out in the open like I am here, do everything you possibly can to get them to fire into your tracks. Even if that involves overextending your side and trying to make it so that the side is a more tempting target, it is always better to get hit in spaced armor than it is flat armor. When pushing with an advance in numbers and mobility against heavy tanks, it is a better idea to push around the side of the tank than to push straight into the tank. Pushing straight into the tank will not only make it so that his armor is still effective, but it will also prevent you from being able to have all of your guns fire at them at the same time. When you're on a losing streak, play different tanks of very extremely different playstyles in order to get yourself out of the funk, I guess you can say. Sometimes for me, mixing up tiers and mixing up tanks that play completely differently, even if it's in the same class, for example a sniping TD versus an assault TD, helps mix it up enough so that you're able to change the mood you're in. I don't know, it works. I don't have a good clip for this either, but if you are trying to shoot something that's outside of your render range, try to line it up with using the minimap. If you look on your minimap, you can try to get the way that you're facing to line up with exactly where the enemy tank icon is to try to find a spot where they're most likely to be. It usually doesn't work, but this is the best bet you get. Similarly to the last tip, blind fire obvious sniping bushes on the enemy lines. If you're sitting there without anything better to shoot at, you might as well take some shots at where enemy tanks are usually located. Even if it's not a hit, all you're wasting is credits, and when you're firing shots out of the FE, pieces of your soul, because good god, those shells are expensive. When leading a target with HE, this doesn't apply to you artillery, try aiming above the enemy tank. This will allow the shell to dip. The fastest and easiest way to increase your win rate is to play with good players and complementary tanks. This doesn't necessarily mean the same tanks or the same types of tanks. This could mean 1 light tank and 2 tank destroyers. This could mean 1 medium tank, 1 heavy tank, and then 1 tank destroyer to play support for both. Play higher tiers not only to increase the challenge and the skill level of the game, but also to increase your stats. PR increases faster in higher tier tanks than any other tanks because it does not take into account the tier. All it takes into account is the raw numbers. For example, damage per battle. If you're planning on playing this game for any length of time, get 1 tier 8 premium. Only after you get an actual tier 8 tank, because you want to make sure that you're ready for that skill level of play. But get at least 1 tier 8 premium because they generate more credits per battle than any other tank, and they are also good at training your crew. So you can train your crew in that tank and then transfer it to a similar tank that you are playing to get to tier 10 for. Need gold for World of Tanks but don't want to spend real-life money because it sucks? Don't worry. Wargaming hosts tournaments every single week, almost every single day, and each tournament is worth some amount of gold. The more you play in, the better you'll get and the more gold you'll earn. There is absolutely no entrance fee, all it requires is time, so it's nice and easy to sign up and pretty much make money. When you're using a large repair kit, try to wait until at least multiple modules are damaged before using it unless in an absolute emergency. I don't have any clips of myself using a large repair kit because I personally think they're a complete waste of credits. But that's just me. Prioritize living tanks. By this I mean if a tank is AFK or on fire or flipped or otherwise already effectively dead, aim for the tank that's not already dead. So pretty much shoot at the tanks that are going to be shooting back at you. If you manage to sneak up behind a group of enemies, make sure you are prioritizing the tank that is in the farthest in the back, especially in random battles. This is because teammates usually don't communicate with each other as much as they should be, and by shooting the tank in the back, most other people won't notice the fact that somebody behind them is taking damage as they will that somebody in front of them is taking damage. So this will narrow the amount of tanks that will be paying attention to you. For example, in this clip, that Super Conqueror had no idea I was here. In close combat, use the scope to be able to see what you are shooting at, but try to zoom out as far as possible. The farthest you can zoom out while in scope, which I sometimes call first person, is 2 times. The easiest way to make sure that you don't overdo it and zoom completely out of the scope is in settings in general on the right side. There is an option for you to deselect or select limit scope shift to the shift key. You do want it as the shift key so that you cannot go in or out of scope by doing anything besides pressing shift. No one cares about the radio operator. And for good reason too, because 90% of the time, if the radio operator dies, nothing happens. All the radio operator does is extend your radio range a little bit, which is usually already more than enough to encompass the entirety of the map. But the only time you are supposed to maybe heal the radio operator is if they either have Brothers in Arms, because any dead crew member will negate the effect of Brothers in Arms, or if it doubles as a loader, such as in the French heavy tanks. If artillery is busy preventing you from camping and killing all of your crew members with each shot, it is important to know which crew members are the most important. This means that some crew members are worth more than others, and don't let anybody tell you that humans aren't quantifiable, because in this game they sure are. Radio operator, as I said, is almost always the most useless one. That is followed closely by driver if you are in close combat or in anything besides a light tank, because it really doesn't matter too much. Commander is extremely important because it uses your sixth sense and things like that, and usually has a large impact on everybody else. And then after that, it goes loader is next important, and then gunner. For the love of God, stop repairing your slightly damaged tracks and radio. The radio does not matter. Slightly damaged tracks do matter the tiniest little bit in that they slightly reduce your speed and slightly reduce your turning ability. But there are so many people that I have seen who repair them over ammo racks and things like that. Don't do that. It's not important enough. Fuel tanks are slightly more complicated. If you have a automatic fire extinguisher, you really don't have to repair the fuel tanks because that'll negate most of the damage you take anyway. If you have spare time, do repair the fuel tanks because that is the leading cause of fire. But it is not nearly as important as things like a damaged ammo rack or a damaged engine. If you play a battle poorly, a good rule of thumb is to take one thing from the battle that you know you could have done better with, and keep that in mind for the next time you play anything. So each battle that you lose or you die too early on, instead of raging if you really want to try to improve, then try to say like, alright, in this situation I should have gone here. And then use that for future reference. If randoms particularly suck on a specific day, try to play with some random stronghold teams. Usually you can make a couple credits, and it's a good way to just play the game casually. And maybe you'll find a clan that you don't hate, and you can join. Is spam left-clicking when you're about to reload a bit too annoying? Well, it took me way too long to figure this out, but you can simply hold down left-click, and then that'll fire for you as soon as the shell's loaded. It's particularly useful in autoloaders, but do be careful if you are holding down the fire button. It will fire as soon as you're loaded. So make sure that you're aimed at a spot that you can penetrate. When you're about to get rammed or ramming somebody else and you want to minimize the amount of damage that you are taking, try to make sure that the first point of contact is your track. The spaced armor acts as a sort of buffer so that you don't take as much damage when you're ramming. But keep in mind, if you're trying to maximize damage given, you are also reducing the amount of damage that you are giving to the opponent. If you have an enemy tracked side on but you can't reload fast enough to keep them permatracked, just move back and forth and keep tapping into them to keep their track damaged. All you have to do is hit them with enough momentum in order to damage the track, and then that'll keep them tracked. You don't have to worry about re-destroying the track each time. Hug the side of slow and fat heavy tanks in order to keep them from being able to get their gun to be able to shoot you. Pretty much, you want to make sure that you're moving back and forth as close to them as you possibly can to reduce the chance of their gun being able to fall on you and have perfectly aimed and perfectly timed shots. While trying to minimize the amount of damage that you are taking, always remain on the move. The more you move, the harder it is for them to hit your weak spots, and the easier it is for you to block hits. When you are using a tank where the flat turret cheeks are the weak spot of the tank, hold down right-click while you're side-scraping and aim the turret towards the inside so that the turret becomes an extension of the hull. This is particularly important with the mouse, the E100, and tanks similar to it. If your turret cheeks are the weak spot, you want to make sure that you're angling them just as well as you are the rest of the tank. I've used this clip way too many times, but do not side-scrape if you are planning on pushing. Side-scraping is a holding mechanic. You want to be able to hold your opponent in the same place, and at the same point in time, you are stuck in that location. If you are side-scraping, you are committing to a location. If you want to push, then you're going to have to play slightly more aggressively. Keep your minimap large on your screen. You can adjust the size of the minimap with the plus and minus keys on your keyboard. It is important to keep it large because you don't want to be squinting to try to figure out what the hell is going on around you. You get a camo bonus when you're staying still. Use it. Stop moving around so much when you're trying to be sneaky. The only tank that actually is effective while staying still is, while moving, is the light tank. Adjust your sensitivity settings. Your arcade sensitivity can be whatever you feel most comfortable with, but I advise keeping your sniper sensitivity lower than you would think. This is because the way you want to play the game is by using your arcade sensitivity to lock onto a target, and then switching over to your sniper mode in order to aim for a weak spot. The more you're moving around in your sniper mode, the harder it is to lock into those tiny weak spots. Maximum spotting distance is 445, right? No. The maximum spotting range is whatever you want it to be, but the maximum view circle is limited to 445. Everything beyond that will negate the amount of camouflage that the enemy has. So it is still worth it to go above 445 because you're reducing the percentage camo bonus that the enemy tank you're trying to find has. High explosive and HESH shells and heat shells cannot fire through cover. This means that if you are trying to fire through a wall or a fence, you cannot fire high explosive shells all the way through. They will be stopped by the fence. Even AP and APCR shells will be reduced in their amount of penetration. So if you're trying to bounce an enemy shot, sometimes it's a good idea to try to use some fences because people underestimate the amount of penetration that those negate. When you are capping against non-artillery or against artillery that you know which direction they are in, then it is a good idea to try to use solid cover to hide from them while capping. When capping against artillery, however, you should not stay inside bushes or other kinds of cover. That is because a good arty player will always try to blind fire the bushes and cover first. This one is extremely risky, and I don't fully recommend it because you're going to have to move and negate your camo. But if you want, you are able to switch between shots where the artillery last blind fired. A lot of the time, and especially if you can recognize the pattern, artillery players won't fire in the same spot twice when trying to get a blind reset on cap. This is probably my favorite trick of this video. If you are capping against an enemy artillery, don't use the semi-destructible cover. Instead, fire into it to make it seem, from the artillery's perspective, like you are driving through that cover. By firing through the cover, it looks like there's a tank driving through it, and it is incredibly satisfying to watch an artillery fruitlessly try to fire at things that you just shot into. Stay alive as long as possible in order to maximize your impact on the game and increase your skill level. The better players will almost always survive for longer. That does not necessarily mean you are the best player because you are playing artillery, But it is important to try to stay alive as long as possible. Again, this does not mean camp. Don't just camp the whole game. But you should be able to recognize when pushing is a bit too risky. So usually the best players are the ones that are alive at the end of the game. And that's it. That's all 120-ish tips and tricks that I was planning on releasing all in one video. You're welcome for not releasing it all in one video. These were so much longer and took so much longer than I thought they would, mostly because I had to find clips for each of these examples, and some of them I just gave up on. Speaking of finding clips for examples, thank you to Horatius and Spitfire33 in my clan for volunteering on demonstrating some of these clips and acting stupid so that it would look better for the tips and tricks video. This video would not have been possible without them. Neither would have the first one, honestly. If you're able to keep all of these in mind, then you're already on track to becoming a better World of Tanks player. I got a couple requests for my next video to be focusing more upon the higher end tips and tricks, so I will definitely be working on a video for that. Probably a series, because the higher end stuff does require a bit more specifics than the basic tips and tricks. But either way, I hope everybody enjoyed this video. And yeah, that's about it. I'll see you in like 2 months when I get enough motivation to make another one of these.